Tonight, I'm doing a compilation for some of my most requested videos. You all seem to really enjoy the Middle-earth lore, so I wanted to take it a step further and add a small story section at the start, just to get us all immersed and ready for the lore. We'll be spending a day in the Shire together, you and I, and of course, our Hobbit friends, and whoever else might wander in that day. Then we'll cover a whole bunch of topics, from the fearsome dragons of Middle-earth, the iconic Witch King of Angmar and his Nazgul, to the Balrogs and ancient dwarven kingdoms, and even heroes like Aragorn and the history of the Shire. So go on and get yourself a helping of second breakfast. We're going to be here a while. And if you'd like a way to support the channel, consider joining the fellowship over on my Patreon. But now it's time to lose yourself in the adventure. Pull your cloak in tight, make sure you've got enough Lember's bread packed for the trip, and let's get started. You wake to the sound of birds. That's the first thing. Not the frantic shrieking of gulls, like those poor folk out by the coast, nor the miserable croaking of crows that haunt the marshes of Middle-earth, but a bright, warbling tune from a thrush just outside your round window. You lie there a moment, feeling warm under your quilt, breathing in the smell of something sweet baking down the hill. Mrs. Goodworth's famous honey cakes, maybe. Could be apple tarts. Either way, they'll be gone if you don't get up soon. The air in your burrow is cool and still, touched by the smokiness of the embers in your hearth, long since gone out. The sky outside your window is soft and gold-streaked, painting the wooden floor with warmth. All in all, it's promising to be a pleasant morning. You stretch, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, and pad over to the wash basin. Breakfast is an unhurried affair, as it should be. Thick slices of buttered toast, a dollop of blackberry jam, and a fried egg crisped just right. None of that undercooked nonsense Dando Brockhouse swears by. The tea is strong and sweet, poured into your favorite earthenware mug, the one with the chip along the rim from when you knocked it over last spring in a rush to answer the door. Speaking of doors, there's a knock at yours. Are you alive in there? You hear the familiar, amused voice call out. You sigh, setting your mug down, and answer the door to find Tomlin Brandybuck. He's got his typical wide grin on his boyish face, hands shoved into his waistcoat pockets like he hasn't got a care in the world. Barely, you say, and if you've come to ask me to help you with something troublesome, the answer's no. Tomlin presses a hand to his chest, looking wounded. Me? Cause trouble? Why, I'm a proper, homely hobbit through and through. You give him a look. There's something restless about him, an energy that keeps him shifting from foot to foot, fiddling with a loose thread on his sleeve, or spinning a coin between his fingers when he's got nothing better to do. He grins again. Well, since you ask, I did need a second pair of hands down at the market. The Took girls have set up a new pastry stall, and I find myself in desperate need of assistance in determining which is best. You want me to help you eat pastries? It's a difficult task, I know, but someone's got to do it. He shrugs good-naturedly. And that's how you find yourself heading down the road to the marketplace. The early sunlight is warm on your face, and the stones underfoot are flat and even, the tips of grass barely tickling the soles of your feet. The Hobbiton marketplace is not grand, nor is it sprawling, but it is joyfully alive in a way only Hobbit gatherings can be, especially on sunny days like this. Nestled in a grassy clearing at the village's heart, it consists of a winding, haphazard collection of wooden stalls, carts, and tables covered in checkered cloths, all busy from mid-morning until the afternoon sun hangs high. Your ear follows the up and down of hobbit chatter and haggling. You bounce on your heels and peek left and right, trying to decide what to spend your silver pennies on. You see a barrel-chested farmer weighing a sack of potatoes, arguing over the price with a trader. Clearly he's way too involved in the back and forth, because a group of unsupervised children are swiping small spuds from a hole in the bag, giggling like it's the greatest heist they've ever pulled off. Your nose picks up on the sweet tang of pipeweed from a nearby stall, where old Ham Grub, his teeth yellowed from years of indulgence, sits puffing away as he sells bundles of long-bottom leaf and old Toby to those looking to refill their pouches. To your left, a fruit and vegetable stand is run by Daisy Burrows. Her plump, dimpled hands move fast as she polishes apples and stacks plump, golden pears into neat pyramids. The creaky crates under her stall overflow with round pumpkins, bunches of spring onions, and turnips still dusted with the damp earth they were pulled from that morning. A little further down, a cheesemonger's stall is run by a stout fellow named Bodo Smallborough, who is energetically explaining the difference between an aged blue-veined cheddar and a crumbly white cheese he claims comes from the South Farthing. He slices off a generous sample for an eager customer. Now this melts just right over a toasted slice of sourdough, perfect for second breakfast, mind you. Tomlin, of course, makes straight for the pastry table. "Good morning, Miss Took," he greets, all smiles as he leans lazily on the counter. "What fine treats have you got for us today?" Primrose Took is a sharp-eyed and unimpressed hobbit, and she doesn't return his grin. For paying customers, a fine selection of apple turnovers, honeyed scones, and raspberry tarts. For you, Tomlin, I've not got a thing, but a firm reminder that sweet words don't count as payment at my stall. Tomlin rubs the back of his neck, and his foxish features twist into an expression that seems a little downcast. You wisely slide a few pennies across the counter. "One of each, if you please, Miss Took." "Now there's a sensible hobbit," she says, handing over a carefully wrapped bundle, bulging with sugary delight. "Enjoy, and keep that one out of trouble." She gives a pointed look at Tomlin. Tomlin sighs as you pass him his share. "I was hoping she might be feeling charitable today." "She's a Took," you remind him. "Fair point." The morning passes in the way all good Shire mornings do. Slowly, pleasantly, with good company and a full belly. You meander past the bookstall, flipping idly through a collection of old travel journals. You have no doubt that these are mostly exaggerations. There's no way there were dark riders on the roads through Bree. What far-fetched nonsense, you think to yourself. The adventurous sort really do jot anything down after a few mugs of ale, don't they? By midday, you and Tomlin are sat on the edge of an empty wagon, short feet dangling off the side, as you lick the remnants of raspberry flakes off your fingers. "You ever think about going?" he asks suddenly, gazing off toward the far fields, where the road stretches out past Bywater. You follow his gaze, shielding your eyes from the glaring sun. Going where? Anywhere. Out there. He waves a hand vaguely. Bree, the South Farthing, even further just to see. You huff. You've been talking to old Samwise Gamgee again, haven't you? Tomlin nods earnestly. He does have good stories. He has big stories, you correct, and feet too big for the rest of him. That's how you can tell he's spent too much time among men and elves. Tomlin laughs and swings his feet. Maybe so. You lean back against the side of the wagon, watching as a family of ducks waddles across the village green, unbothered by the world. The sun is warm, the breeze is cool, and the distant worries of far-off lands feel just that, distant. There's no reason to go anywhere, really. Not when everything you need is right here. A quarter of an hour later, you're halfway through filling a basket with tea leaves when the marketplace hushes. It starts at the far end, whispers passing from stall to stall, heads turning. A few hobbits step back, making way. You crane your neck to see what's causing the commotion. It's a dwarf. A dusty one with a thick, ruddy beard, braided into 2 plaits, an iron-studded belt, and a massive pack slung over one shoulder. His boots are caked in dried mud, and his bushy eyebrows are furrowed in irritation as he turns a very tattered-looking map over in his hands. Blasted road signs, he mutters. Should have taken the fork after the prancing pony. Ah, but that ruffian at the gate said south, not southeast. Bah, directions in these parts are as useful as a teapot with no bottom. Tomlin nudges you. That's not something you see every day. No, you murmur, watching as the dwarf squints at his map, turning it sideways like that'll help. One of the braver hobbits, Miss Grubb, the baker, clears her throat and says, can we help you, Master Dwarf? The dwarf glances up and takes in the sea of round faces staring at him, then lets out a gruff sigh. That depends. Do any of you know how to read one of these cursed maps? He holds it up. You and Tomlin exchange glances. Let's have a look then, you say, stepping forward, wiping your hands down on your trousers. The map is, to put it kindly, a disaster. The ink is smudged with water stains in several places. A corner is torn clean off. And what's left is covered in runic script and crisscrossed with little symbols. Mountains, rivers, caves, and a big, bold X, somewhere near the bottom. Oh ho, you've got yourself a treasure map then, Master Dwarf? Tomlin asks him, his eyes lighting up. The dwarf grunts. Not your concern, lad. Isn't it, though? Tomlin counters. Because if you were aiming for mountains and wound up in Hobbiton, I'd say your chances of finding that treasure are looking rather slim. The dwarf scowls, then admits defeat. Well, seeing as I've lost my bearings, I wouldn't say no to a pint and some hot food while I sort this mess out. Which is how, an hour later, you find yourself at the Green Dragon Tavern, watching a dwarf grumble over his map while demolishing a plate of lamb stew. In between messy, undignified bites, he goes on and on about his grandfather and his father before him, and how they served under Thorin Oakenshield and face the dragon Smaug, chiefest and greatest of calamities. Outlandish nonsense, obviously. Clearly the dwarfs had too much ale. But the stories were fun to listen to anyways. Tomlin, of course, loves this kind of talk. He's always been a restless hobbit, dreaming of adventure. He pipes up with his own stories that he's heard. He insists there's a sort of monster called a barog, or bullrog, or something like that. He says it's got a whip made of fire and is as big as a mountain. Then the chatter turns to elves and men, and of dark things in the hidden places of Middle-earth that no good hobbit should speak of. Afternoon drifts into evening, and you make your way home along the quiet lane, following the pink and orange streaked skyline. You say goodbye to Tomlin at a fork in the road, and he walks away, whistling an old tune cheerfully, and disappears around the bend. Soon you arrive at the gate to your home and swing it open gently. The path to your round, yellow door is lined with tufts of heather. You brush a hand over the blooms as you pass, breathing in deep. Back inside, you stoke the hearth, coaxing the embers to life, and let your toes sink into the thick woven rug near the fire. The flames rise slowly, lighting up the well-loved clutter of your sitting room. There's half-read books stacked on the side table, a cup left from this morning's tea, a pile of parchment covered in lazy notes and scribbled ideas. You stretch out your arms, rolling your shoulders, then settle into your favorite chair. It's the one with just the right dip in the cushions, formed over years of cozy nights and spontaneous afternoon naps. For a while, you let the quiet fill the space. Then, reaching for your writing desk, you pull out a fresh sheet of parchment. Lately, you've taken to writing. Nothing grand or ambitious, like the journals about dragon encounters and dark lords. Just simple stories, little tales of the people you know, the things you've seen, the small adventures of life in the Shire. A story about the Goodwert's prize-winning goose, about young Lily Proudfoot's disastrous attempt at making a birthday cake, about the time Tomlin tried to outpace the post rider on foot and ended up tumbling headfirst into a hay cart. You dip your quill in ink and let the words come, slow and easy, shaped by memory and firelight. Outside, the crickets begin their evening chorus, and somewhere far off, an owl hoots. The sky beyond your round window is deep blue now, silvered with stars. You pause, twirling the quill between your fingers, thinking for a moment about Tomlin's question, about the road stretching beyond the hills, about Bree and beyond. Maybe one day, but not today. Today, you have a month's supply of tea leaves, a warm home, and a good friend to share sweets and stories with. And really, what more could a hobbit ask for? Well, friends, I hope you enjoyed that little intro. And now, it's time for the lore. We'll start off with the Balrogs and the mines of Moria. Long before it was called Moria, it had a much grander name, Khazad-dûm, and it was the crown jewel of dwarven craftsmanship, the heart of their entire civilization. To the dwarves, it wasn't a mine at all. It was home. But if we want to understand how this all started, we have to go back, way back, to the very beginning of dwarven history. And that means talking about Durin the Deathless. Durin was the first of the 7 dwarven fathers. And unlike his brethren, he didn't die. Not really. The dwarves believed that his spirit was reincarnated in his descendants. Each time a new Durin was born, it was said to be the same soul returning to lead his people. He first awoke at Mount Gundabad, and from there he made his way down towards the south, until he found a glen of shadows between 2 great arms of the mountains, above which 3 white peaks were shining. This led him to a quiet little lake nestled in the shadows of what will eventually come to know as the Misty Mountains. The water reflected the stars so perfectly that it looked like a second sky. And in that reflection, Durin saw a crown of stars hovering above his head. He took this as a sign and named the lake Keled Zaram, the Mirrormere. He even called the 3 peaks he'd seen as the Redhorn, the Silvertine, and Cloudy Head. Durin then chose the caves above the lake, the ones that faced towards the east, as the earliest foothold for his new dwarven kingdom. Over time, his descendants would carve a stone monolith with runes, calling it Durin's Stone. And it stood in the same spot where he'd first looked into the Mirrormere. These places would all become sacred to the dwarves, and it's easy to understand why. Durin had set his people to work. They carved the stone of the mountains into the great underground halls of Khazad-dûm. They built an empire, a kingdom that grew quickly in both its size and grandeur, until it was known as the greatest of all the mansions of the dwarves. And it wasn't just about pretty carvings and fancy pillars, although there were definitely loads of those. Khazad-dûm was also a stronghold. Stone walls thicker than castle keeps. Labyrinthine passages that could confuse even the wisest elves, and halls that sung with the clang of forges day and night. Unyielding bridges crossed over black, bottomless chasms where no sound ever echoed back. They were unstoppable. Down and down they went, building mines, treasuries, and even dungeons. Although far below the lowest deep of Khazad-dûm, there were primordial tunnels in everlasting darkness, inhabited by nameless things that had lived there since the earliest beginnings of the world. Few, if any, had actually ever seen these beings, and not much at all is really known about them. Although Gandalf did theorize that the Watcher in the Water, which is that Lovecraftian monster that attacks the Fellowship outside of the mines of Moria, could have been one of those nameless things. But for all its beauty and mystery, the true reason for Khazad-dûm's fame was the ore hidden within its bones. Not gold, not silver, mithril. The elves called it true silver. Lighter than silk, stronger than steel, and worth more than entire kingdoms. It didn't tarnish, didn't rust, and reflected light so brilliantly it looked like moonlight trapped in metal. It was said even a single thread of mithril was more valuable than a whole chest of gold. But even the mightiest kingdoms aren't self-sustaining. You need trade, allies, and neighbors who don't want you dead. Enter the elves of Eregion, who were their closest neighbors to the west. For once, elves and dwarves put aside their natural distaste for each other and formed a trading partnership. The elves of Eregion needed dwarven craftsmanship, and most of all, mithril. In return, the elves offered knowledge and enchantments, leading to a golden age for both peoples. And they really did learn a lot from each other. The best example of this are the doors of Durin. Built into the rock face of the Misty Mountains, the doors are invisible when shut. No hinges, no cracks, no seams. When Gandalf and the Fellowship come across them, they're met with smooth, impenetrable stone. But under the right light, moonlight specifically, something amazing happens. Elvish letters shimmer into view, glowing with soft blue light. Speak, friend, and enter. The design itself was a collaboration between Celebrimbor of Eregion and Navi the dwarf. Navi provided the structure, the framework, the mechanics, and Celebrimbor wove the magic into it. For a time, it seemed nothing could go wrong. But of course, something always goes wrong. A figure calling himself Anatar came to the elves, offering knowledge of his own. You might know him better by another name, Sauron. He disguised himself as a bringer of wisdom, a friend to smiths and craftsmen. With his help, the elves forged the rings of power. And we all know how that turned out. But in case you want to know more, I've got another video that goes a bit more in depth about that, which I'll link in the description. But when the elves discovered the truth, that Anatar was Sauron in disguise, it was too late. Sauron unleashed his wrath on Eregion, sacking the entire region. Celebrimbor was killed, and the rings were either taken or hidden away. Among those rings were the ones given to the dwarves, and it was said to have a peculiar effect on them. Unlike men, the dwarves could not be bent to Sauron's will, but the ring had its own way of corrupting them. It amplified their desire for wealth, turning simple ambition into obsession. The dwarves of Khazad-dûm responded to Sauron's attack by slamming their doors shut. No one got in, no one got out. The Golden Age was over. The dwarves still had their mithril, and the elves still had their enchantments. But that old partnership crumbled. From that point on, dwarves and elves became estranged. By the time Gimli and Legolas meet on the shores of Rivendell, they carry the weight of 1,000 years of mistrust. For a time, Khazad-dûm remained untouched by the world's turmoil. Their forges kept churning, and the mining went on. But under the ring's influence, their love of mithril became more of a dangerous dependence. So they dug deeper than ever before. And as the old saying goes, he who digs for treasure should beware of what lies beneath. It wasn't sudden, like a cave-in. It came slowly. Weird noises in the lowest dungeons, slight tremors that made the lanterns sway just a little too much. Whispers among the miners about shadows moving in places shadows had no business being. At first, they dismissed it probably blinded by their desire for mithril. Superstition, they said. No shadow could trouble a dwarf. They were the folk of the stone, after all. But superstition became something else entirely. The day during the 6th, king of Khazad-dûm fell victim to a monstrous thing which he'd awoken while mining in the farthest reaches of the deeps. The creature was named Durin's Bane, and it unleashed its destruction on the city and the dwarves, killing even Durin's son, who'd become king after him. None of the warriors who fought it survived. Not a single one. The bodies were scorched, the stone beneath them blackened as if a forge had exploded. It was only then that the dwarves understood what they'd done. They had dug too far and broken into a place no living thing had any right to disturb, and awakened something older than their kingdom. Older than the elves even. A thing of flame and shadow. A Balrog of Morgoth. The rest of the dwarves fled and abandoned Khazad-dûm, and it was empty for centuries. That's when it became known as Moria, the Black Pit. Before I continue, it's worth explaining what a Balrog actually is. Most people just picture the scene from the movies. Horns, flames, a crackling whip of fire, and just think they're another fantasy monster. But there's more to it than that. Balrogs aren't beasts. They aren't like orcs, trolls, or dragons. They're spirits, Maya, to be precise. That's the same order of beings as Gandalf, Sauron, and Saruman. This is a bit confusing if you're not at all familiar with the lore. But basically, long ago, before the world was even properly shaped, these spirits existed as servants of the greater powers. Eru Ilúvatar was the ultimate creator, the one who is above all thrones forever. He created the Valar, and delegated to them the creation and governance of the world, who in turn created the Maya spirits to help them. But, as with any story of creation, there was one who refused to play his part. That one was Melkor. Later, he would be called Morgoth, and his very name would strike fear into the hearts of elves and men alike. He was one of the Valar, but he had a problem. He didn't want to serve anyone. He wanted control. While the others tried to bring balance and beauty to the world, Morgoth had a blackened heart of evil and wanted it for himself. Some, like Gandalf, stayed loyal to the will of Eru and the Valar. Others, like Sauron and the Balrogs, followed Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. With his cunning, he swayed several of the Maya to join his cause, offering them power, glory, and dominion. And among those who bent the knee to Morgoth were the ones who'd be known as Balrogs. Under Morgoth's sway, they became creatures of war. Their flame, which had once symbolized purity and creation, became a means of destruction. Their forms grew more physical, more terrifying. I really love the way they're described in the books, so I'm going to read a quick line just so you can picture them and really understand how terrifying these things must have been to the warriors that faced them on the battlefields. It was like a great shadow, in the middle of which was a dark form, of man shape maybe, yet greater. And a power and terror seemed to be in it and to go before it. They had hearts of fire, tongues like red blades, and yellow eyes like furnaces. And they were insanely powerful. The exact number of how many existed once is not really known. But there were at least 3, and at most 7. They had a bunch of different weapons. Some used swords covered in eternal fire, molten whips and maces, and the Lord of the Balrogs, who we'll talk about in a little bit, even had a great black axe. Now it would be impossible to talk about the Balrogs without mentioning Ungoliant. She wasn't a Balrog, but she was tied to one of the darkest moments in Middle-earth's history. Ungoliant was a being of pure darkness, and her origin is one of the most mysterious ones out there. Some say she came from beyond Arda, from the void itself, a place where even the Valar didn't go. Others think she may have been one of the spirits who, like the Balrogs, had been twisted into something monstrous. But unlike the Balrogs, her form wasn't fire and shadow. It was shadow and hunger. She took the form of a monstrous spider, and her hunger was insatiable. At the height of Morgoth's rebellion, he needed a distraction. He wanted to weaken the Valar and strike a blow so devastating that they would never recover. So he sought out Ungoliant, knowing that her hunger was her only master. He made her a promise. "Help me, and I will sate your hunger with whatever you desire." Ungoliant agreed. The two of them went into Valinor, the undying lands where the Valar resided. In Valinor stood the 2 trees, which were the source of light for all the world. They were living, radiant, and their glow was like sunlight and moonlight combined. Morgoth took a spear and struck them down. But it wasn't enough to kill the trees. They still had life in them. That's where Ungoliant came in. She drained them dry. She sucked the light, the sap, and the very essence of the trees into herself. Their glow faded, and the world was plunged into darkness. Ungoliant grew larger and darker, swelling with every drop of stolen light. She grew so big that even Morgoth was afraid. After they'd destroyed the 2 trees, Morgoth declared war on the Valar and on the elves. He fled to his stronghold of Angband in Middle-earth, where the rest of his forces waited for him. But the great spider of the void suspected that Morgoth might not make good on his promise, that he intended to betray her. So she attacked him. She wrapped him in her webs, trapping him in an endless cocoon of gloom. Morgoth let out such a terrible cry of pain that the Balrogs hibernating under Angband heard him and came to help their master. They fought off her webs with whips of flame, freeing Morgoth. Just to give you an idea of how strong these creatures are, a small handful of Balrog were able to defeat and chase away a gigantic being of the void. It's said she ran off into the far corners of the world, hiding in the dark places where her descendants, like the great spider Shelob, would later dwell. Morgoth stopped the Balrog from pursuing her, and they returned to Angband, waiting for their next set of orders. They took part in basically every major battle of the First Age. If you saw a Balrog on the battlefield, you knew it was over. These weren't enemies you fought. They were enemies you survived, if you were lucky, of course. One of the most famous encounters with a Balrog came during the fall of Gondolin. Gondolin was an elven city hidden so well that Morgoth himself didn't know where it was for centuries. But once he learned its location, he threw everything he had at it. His forces stormed the gates, and among them was one of the mightiest Balrogs of them all, Gothmog, Lord of the Balrogs. He's the one who killed Feanor, one of the greatest elves to ever live, during the battle under the stars. When Gondolin fell, it was Gothmog who led the assault. He rode on the back of a dragon to the hidden city, and it was he who struck down Ecthelion, another one of the elves' finest warriors. But in that battle, the elf didn't go down alone. He drove his spiked helmet straight into Gothmog's chest, and both of them fell into the fountain of the king. The water extinguished Gothmog's flame, killing him for good. It's a rare thing to see a Balrog killed, but it can be done. It just takes a warrior brave and desperate enough to face them head-on. At the end of the First Age, as a final effort to defeat Morgoth, the Valar sent a host to Middle-earth in what became known as the War of Wrath. It really did seem like the end times. Mountains crumbled. The land itself shifted. But ultimately, Morgoth was beaten, bound, and cast into the void. His fortresses were destroyed, and his armies were scattered. But not every Balrog was killed. Some managed to get away. They retreated into the deepest, darkest places they could find. Caverns and chasms so far below the surface that it wouldn't be until the year 1980 of the Third Age when one was discovered again. And that brings us back to the Balrog that the dwarves of Khazad-dûm had awoken. The one they call Durin's Bane. After the dwarves left, Moria became a stronghold of evil. And the Balrog's presence allowed Sauron's forces to come in and claim the place. Goblins, orcs, and cave trolls moved in, creeping up from the cracks and hunted for abandoned treasure. They feel at home in the twisted crawl spaces of the world where sunlight never touches. The foul creatures built their nests in the upper halls, always careful not to stray too far down, because even they knew better. Not all dwarves gave up on Moria, though. Some still dreamed of getting their ancestral kingdom back. There was at one point an expedition by a company of dwarves from the Lonely Mountains, led by Balin, one of the dwarves who had followed Thorin Oakenshield on the quest for Erebor. He believed it could be reclaimed. After all, he'd seen Erebor taken back from the dragon Smaug. If a fire-breathing dragon could be driven from a mountain, why not a shadow in the dark? So Balin gathered his friends, his kin, brave warriors who believed they could bring light back to Moria. And for a little while, it really seemed like they'd done it. They sent word to Erebor, telling tales of victory. They found Mithril again. They claimed the upper halls. They raised Balin up as Lord of Moria. But ultimately, Sauron's forces outnumbered them, and they were all slain in the depths. Balin's tomb lay in the chamber of Mazarbul, an empty hall littered with bones, broken shields, and blood. Their fate was unclear to the rest of the dwarves. When the Fellowship of the Ring approached Moria, it wasn't their first choice. In fact, it was very much their last. The Redhorn Pass had turned against them, and the icy grip of the mountains forced them to seek shelter below instead of above. Even Gimli, a dwarf whose bloodline traced back to the kings of Khazad-dûm, wasn't entirely sure. He thought maybe his cousin Balin had reclaimed the halls of Moria. Surely it wouldn't be so bad. But Boromir wasn't convinced. Legolas wanted no part of it. He knew the stories. Everyone knew the stories. Gandalf didn't want to choose this path either. But snow was falling thick on the pass, and they were being watched from the skies. Saruman's crow spies, the Crebain of Dunland, had spotted them. They couldn't really stay in the open any longer. The way under the mountain was the only way forward. The entrance to Moria, also known as the West Gate, was not really a hidden passage or a secret in the traditional sense. It was built into the side of the Misty Mountains. By day, it just looked like a blank wall of unbroken rock. But under the light of the moon, its true design was revealed. The outline of a hammer and anvil representing dwarven craftsmanship was paired with a crown and 7 stars. A reference to Durin, the first of the dwarves' 7 fathers. Above all of this was an inscription that translated to "The doors of Durin, Lord of Moria. Speak, friend, and enter." The phrase is a riddle. It looks like a type of invitation, but it is, in fact, a literal instruction. The Elvish word for friend is melon, and when spoken aloud, it triggers the mechanism to open the doors. Like I'd touched on earlier, this design really was the culmination of the peaceful and cooperative relationship that once existed between the dwarves and their elvish neighbours. When the Fellowship of the Ring arrived at the West Gate, they struggled to open it. Gandalf, who was really well versed in ancient languages and spells, tried numerous incantations and passwords, thinking it required a secret phrase or spell. After several failed attempts, Frodo realized the simplicity of the riddle and suggested that the inscription was literal. So Gandalf spoke the word in Elvish. The doors shifted and the stone parted, revealing the entrance to Moria. But before they could go in, something disturbed the still, unnaturally dark pool by the gate. Just the sight of the water made Frodo feel uneasy. They were being stalked by the Watcher in the water. If you've seen the movies, you know how scary this next bit is. But personally, I find the book's more vague description of it even more terrifying. There's always something more dreadful about a creature whose full form is unknowable. A terror so vast that you can only fathom parts of it. Once the West Gate opened, the creature attacked. It